Subcommittee on National Security will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. The Chair notes the presence of our colleagues from the full Committee of Oversight and Government Reform. We appreciate your interest in this topic and welcome your participation today when you get here. I ask unanimous consent that all members of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform be allowed to fully participate in today's hearing. Without objection, it is so ordered. With a new administration and VA Secretary, we have an opportunity to set a new course at the Veterans Administration. The VA is the topic of our first subcommittee hearing for a reason. This subcommittee stands foursquare behind our veterans and is committed to ensuring that veterans receive the benefits they have earned. Over the past several years, the VA has not lived up to the promises that have been made to our nation's heroes. Many veterans have experienced significant problems receiving the health care they deserve. The problems and scandals of the last few years have undermined faith in the VA. The point of this hearing today is to shed light on the continuing cases of fraud, waste, and abuse at the VA that require reform. The 2014 wait time scandal brought to light a number of serious abuses that has, sad to say, not been fully corrected. For example, the VA charged a doctor with prescribing high amounts of opiates to patients receiving care for mental health. This doctor received several $1,000s in bonus money 9 months after an OIG report exposed his poor prescription practices. In addition, one VA senior executive volunteered to transfer to a new office. The new position required less responsibility, but this employee still received relocation incentives and the same annual salary of over $180,000. VA staff members in the Southern Arizona VA manipulated patient wait times in order to meet incentive requirements and national scheduling procedures. These staff members received bonuses even though they were not meeting national scheduling standards. Another doctor, this time in the Pittsburgh VA, received a $62,000, $895 bonus for implementing an infection prevention program. 3 days before receiving this bonus, the VA Office of Inspector General issued a report finding that 6 veterans died from Legionnaire's disease because of systematic failures. In the Atlanta VA Medical Center, there was a backlog of 300 unsettled background investigations for new hires because of human resource delays. These are a few of the examples that demonstrate the need for reform. Now, Secretary Shulkin has set out a vision for improving some of VA's programs to better serve our veterans. One of Secretary Shulkin's top priorities is to reshape the Veterans Choice Program. This includes removing a rule regarding veterans' ability to seek care at non-VA facilities. It's important to remove obstacles and make it difficult for veterans to receive medical care. The Choice Program needs to serve its intended function, and if that requires congressional action, then Congress should act forthwith. The new Secretary will also prioritize improved mental health care. According to recent VA statistics, an average of 20 veterans died from suicide each day in the year 2014. These statistics reveal the need to improve quality of care and suicide prevention. We have today representatives from VA's Office of Inspector General to report on some of these troubling cases. We are also joined by Acting Assistant Secretary Pamela Mitchell, here to testify on behalf of Secretary Shulkin. It's my hope that we can have an honest, frank, and positive discussion of the VA's shortcomings and chart a course to reform. One reform that I've proposed is to expand treatment options for veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress by authorizing the VA to link a veteran suffering from PTS with a specially trained service dog, which has proven to be effective with private organizations. For those that have tried more conventional forms of treatment and experienced no release for their suffering, this could actually be a lifesaver, and we've had veterans say that their life has been saved because of a service dog. So just as we ensure that warfighters have every resource available to protect them from the dangers of the battlefield, so too must we provide the veteran transitioning to civilian life with the resources to treat the invisible and lingering effects of the realities of war. The lives of our returning soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are at stake, and we can't afford to fail them after they served us. Those who risk their life for this country deserve the absolute best care upon their return. Time is of the essence. I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony today, and I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee who hails from the Super Bowl champion Boston area, yet another title, Mr. Lynch.
You're very kind, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your courtesy as well. And just because this is our first subcommittee hearing in the new session, I just want to say that I'd again like to express my commitment to working with you and your very capable staff. You've got we both have great staff here that work on behalf of the American people. And I think that our bipartisan oversight work will prove critical to identifying existing and emerging threats. It will also further the important national security missions carried out by federal agencies and our dedicated military and civilian personnel on behalf of the American people. Chief among these missions is ensuring that more than 21 million brave men and women who have served in defense of our nation and represent Americans' veterans community receive the quality of care and the opportunity to transition to a civilian life that is commensurate with their service and their sacrifice. To this end, I welcome today's hearing to examine ongoing reform efforts at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I'd also like to thank our witnesses for helping the committee with its work. It is my understanding that this hearing will focus on recent audit work conducted by the Office of the VA Inspector General and to examine so-called recruitment, retention, and relocation incentives that were previously awarded to certain senior level and VA central office employees. In particular, a January 2017 audit report that was issued by the Inspector General determined that absent additional reforms, the VA will risk spending an estimated $158.7 million in unsupported bonuses and forfeiting $3.9 million in bonuses that should be recouped through fiscal year 2019. And I agree with the Chairman that this area merits meaningful congressional oversight. However, I would also urge that our subcommittee examine a more immediate and serious threat that is facing our veterans community, and that is, quite frankly, the negative impact on veterans services that will be caused by President Trump's executive memorandum to establish an indefinite and discriminate hiring freeze within the Federal Government. This action stops all Federal agencies from hiring full-time Federal workers, including individuals to fill 9,000 vacancies at the VA serving critical functions. The predictable consequences will be to degrade the essential services that our veterans and the American public rely on, rescind the opportunities that that Americans' veterans have earned, and for that reason, veterans organizations ranging from the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States, VFW, and the DAV, Disabled American Veterans, and Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, continue to underscore the devastating effects of the hiring freeze on our returning servicemen and women. As I noted in a letter signed by 107 members of Congress urging President Trump to reconsider his decision, past hiring freezes enacted during both Democratic and Republican administrations have proven to decrease government efficiency, accountability, and transparency at the expense of public services and the American taxpayer. As reported by the Independent Government Accountability Office in its seminal 1982 report examining the government-wide freezes implemented under both President Reagan and President Carter, these actions severely disrupted critical agency operations and diminished Federal oversight of agency programs. I would note that one Carter administration hiring freeze caused a clerical staff shortage at the VA Medical Center that required healthcare professionals to prioritize administrative duties over their core job functions. Not surprisingly, this led to increased patient wait times and severe delays in the processing of medical examinations. The report also found the hiring freeze, quote, caused decreased oversight of Federal programs, making it more difficult for the Inspector General officers to do their jobs, close quote. Something we should remember as we review the critical work of the Inspector General for Veterans Affairs today. Moreover, the current hiring freeze is already having a drastic impact on the ability of our veterans to transition back to civilian life. That's because American veterans make up 1/3 of our Federal workforce and new hires at the Department of Defense, the VA, the Department of Transportation, and other agencies nationwide. According to the Office of Personnel Management, veterans hiring in the Federal Government has also risen significantly in recent years, with Federal agencies hiring an estimated 6,000 more veterans in fiscal year 2015 than the previous year. That's a total of 71,000 new veteran hires and a veteran hire percentage of 32.5% within the federal government. So you see, by instituting a hiring freeze in the federal government, we're blocking out, we're freezing the opportunity of returning veterans to go to work. More than 31,000 of these new hires hired within the federal government were disabled veterans, including over 21,000 veterans with a disability rating of over 30%. In order to ensure that the federal government does not close its doors to American veterans seeking to continue to serve the American people in a federal government job, I recently introduced H.R. 1001, the Veterans Federal Hiring Protection Act. This legislation would simply exempt veterans from the hiring freeze within the federal government, and is even more critical at a time when the Bureau of Labor Statistics just reported an unemployment rate for our newest generation of veterans of 6.3% in January of 2017. That's an increase from 5.7% the previous year and represents over 200,000 Iraq and Afghan veterans who are looking for work right now. H.R. 1001 has been co-sponsored by over 25 members of Congress, and I strongly urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in this effort. In his joint address to Congress last night, President Trump stated, quote, "Our veterans have delivered for this nation, and now we must deliver for them," close quote. So the federal hiring freeze will make it extremely difficult to live up to that promise. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to today's hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you. I will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our panel of witnesses. I'm pleased to welcome Ms. Pamela Mitchell, Acting Assistant Secretary at the Office of Human Resources and Administration within the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, Mr. Nicholas Dahl, Deputy Assistant Inspector General for Audits and Evaluations within the Office of Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and Dr. Irene Barnett, Director of the Bedford Office of the Audits and Evaluations within the Office of Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Welcome to you all. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. So if you can please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please, thank you. Please be seated. All witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we'd appreciate it if you would please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be part of the record. Assistant Secretary Mitchell, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman DeSantis, Ranking Member Lynch, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss internal controls for use of recruitment, relocation, and retention incentives, commonly known as the 3 Rs, within the Department of Veterans Affairs. VA requires talented employees, including highly trained healthcare professionals, to serve the needs of our nation's veterans. We're competing in tough labor markets for skilled personnel, both in the public and the private sectors. The 3 Rs are important human resources tools to help us remain competitive in recruiting and retaining the best personnel to serve our veterans. To that end, we very much appreciate the Inspector General's recommendations to improve controls over use of the 3 Rs, as outlined in their January 2017 report. This report was based on incentives awarded during fiscal year 2014. I'd like to draw your attention to what the Department has done, both in the years prior to and following the period covered by the IG report, to more effectively manage use of the 3 Rs. First, I'd like to note that the size of the VA workforce has increased by 22.5% since 2011, from about 296,000 employees to about 362,000. During that same period, we decreased spending on the 3 Rs by 50%, from approximately $144 million in 2011 to approximately $72 million projected for 2017. In April 2015, we centralized processing of all senior executive personnel actions under the Corporate Senior Executive Management Office, or CMO, implementing additional internal controls for 3 R payments to senior executives. This ensures that proper justifications are made to support payment of incentives and that executives are fulfilling agreed-upon service periods, or that they repay or request a waiver from repayment. As a result of this centralization, our use of retention incentives for executives in particular has decreased dramatically, from approximately $390,000 in fiscal year 2014 to about $17,000 in fiscal year 17 to date. Our VA handbook on pay administration was significantly revised back in April 2013 to require an explanation of an organization's workforce and succession plan as part of the request for or review of a retention incentive. We're in the process of further updating the handbook to reinforce that requirement by requiring a senior leader certify that this plan was reviewed. This process will also require the signatory to attest that all incentives have been reviewed for compliance with VA policy and that appropriate action has been taken to initiate debt collection from individuals who did not fulfill their required service obligation. In the meantime, VA has published interim guidance emphasizing that HR specialists must obtain authorization for an incentive from the appropriate official prior to including one in a vacancy announcement. Significantly, this interim guidance also includes tools to assist our hiring managers and HR professionals, helping ensure they follow proper procedures when offering an incentive. Additionally, we've developed training designed to help them and thus to help eliminate potential misuse of these flexibilities. And this year, we will ask each administration and staff office to submit a report on the incentives they authorized during 2016, certified by the most senior leader in each organization. In closing, I'd like to express, on behalf of the VA workforce, our commitment to the Department's mission to serve veterans. To accomplish that mission requires continued competition for top talent in tough markets, particularly in the private sector for healthcare professionals. The 3 Rs are key human resources tools we need to help us in that competition, particularly when we're faced with serious hiring challenges. We're also committed to ensuring careful consideration and effective oversight of 3R use in the VA. Thank you. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Dahl, you're up for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lynch, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Office of Inspector General's work related to 2 key human capital programs, the 3R Incentive Program and the Drug-Free Workplace Program. VHA provides health care to about 7 million veterans each year through a large network of medical centers and outpatient clinics. To accomplish this, VHA employs over 350,000 people, including physicians, nurses, other healthcare professionals, and administrative employees. VHA uses human capital flexibilities such as the 3R incentives to attract and retain talented employees for its medical facilities. These incentives provide VA with important tools to fill positions that support the agency's critical mission. In fiscal year 2015, VA spent more than $67 million on 3R incentives, with VHA accounting for almost all of this spending. When used prudently and properly, recruitment and relocation incentives help VA attract qualified candidates with in-demand skills and competencies who would otherwise not consider working in the federal government or working at locations where positions are difficult to fill. Retention incentives enable VA to retain employees whose services are essential to its mission and who would otherwise leave federal service. VA also administers a drug-free workplace program, which serves an important role in VA fulfilling its responsibility to protect patients and employees. VA has designated safety-sensitive occupational series that require drug testing as testing-designated positions, including positions such as physicians, nurses, and police officers. There are 3 key parts of this program. First, pre-employment drug testing for testing-designated positions. Second, random drug testing of employees in testing-designated positions. And third, drug testing of employees when there is a reasonable suspicion of on-the-job drug use or where drug use is suspected following a workplace accident or injury. In January, we reported VA needed to improve controls over its use of 3R incentives to ensure these pay authorities are strategically and prudently used to assist in the recruitment and retention of highly qualified employees in hard-to-fill positions. We determined VA's controls over the incentives were inadequate and projected VA would spend almost $159 million on unsupported incentives in fiscal years 2015 through 2019. Specifically, we reported the following related to VHA's use of 3R incentives. First, about 33% of the recruitment incentives VHA awarded in fiscal year 2014 were not properly authorized. Next, about 64% of the relocation incentives VHA awarded were not properly authorized. And finally, about 69% of the retention incentives VHA awarded did not include adequate workforce and succession plans. We made 10 recommendations to the Assistant Secretary for Human Resources, including recommendations to review and update procedures to ensure recruitment and relocation incentives are justified and properly authorized, and to develop internal controls to monitor compliance with developing succession plans to reduce VA's reliance on retention incentives. The Assistant Secretary concurred with our recommendations and provided responsive corrective action plans. We consider 3 recommendations closed due to actions VA has already taken, and VA continues to work on implementing the remaining recommendations. In March 2015, we issued a report detailing the results of an audit of VA's drug-free workplace program. We identified program weaknesses in 3 areas. First, pre-employment applicant drug testing. For that, we reported VA did not ensure compliance with policy to drug test all applicants selected for testing designated positions prior to appointment. Instead, VA selected only about 3 of every 10 applicants for testing. Second, employee random drug testing. We estimated VA achieved a national drug testing rate of 68% of employees selected for random testing in fiscal year 2013. And finally, reasonable suspicion drug testing. VA lacked sufficient oversight practices to monitor whether facilities referred all employees with a positive drug test result to the Employee Assistance Program. Based on our work, we determined VA's program was not accomplishing its primary goal of ensuring illegal drug use was eliminated. We made 5 recommendations, of which 1 remains open. In conclusion, VA has faced significant challenges in recruiting staff into key positions such as physicians and nurses. While we recognize the importance of VA having the ability to use the 3R incentives to meet staffing challenges and strategically manage its workforce, the results of our audit demonstrate that VA needs to take action to improve the management of its 3R incentive program. Also, in the absence of effective oversight of its drug-free workplace program, VA may not be adequately reducing the risks to the safety and well-being of veterans and employees. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement, and we would be happy to answer any questions that you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you. Dr. Barnett, you're up for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, but my colleague Nick Dahl gave our...
Wonderful. Well, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Secretary Mitchell, in a recent news article, Secretary Shulkin noted that one of his top priorities is to reform the Veterans Choice Act. How will the VA go about doing that, or how will the Secretary go about doing that?
Chairman DeSantis, I have no personal knowledge of that I can offer, but I do know that the Secretary is going to be testifying next week.
In front of the House VA Committee?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Are you familiar with the interview he gave to Stars and Stripes a couple days ago?
Not extremely familiar, no, sir.
Okay, so he wants to eliminate the 40-mile, 30-day rule for non-VA care under the Veterans Choice Act. I support that. I wonder, though, would that require a change of statute, or does he think he can do that through the regulations? And I guess you don't know that?
No, sir, that's not within my purview or area of expertise.
Well, we would like to know, because I think that is something that veterans have been frustrated with. Congress passed this several years ago. There was a lot of fanfare about it. It just has not actually done the job, and it has not met the obligations. Let me ask you this. Secretary Shulkin, in a recent interview on Fox News, stressed the importance for VA employees to have due process. So what is exactly the process for firing an individual within the VA?
Well, there are different processes depending on the situation. There are conduct-based issues that occur. There are performance-based issues that occur. And so they take different paths, and then there are also different processes depending on whether it's a Title V employee or a Title 38 employee.
So conduct base is misconduct, you're saying? People that do something wrong. I guess if you were to be convicted for something somewhere, that would obviously be an issue. Performance base. Let's talk about performance base. What is the process if somebody is a poor performer? How would that the VA move to get that person out if they're not serving the veterans well?
Well, typically, the first thing that would happen is that there would be a discussion between the supervisor and the employee, and that would be followed by what's called a performance improvement plan, or a PIP, and an employee is given a period of time.
How long typically?
At least 30 days, but sometimes longer. It may depend on what the actual issue of performance is. And so then there's a period of time to look at, is the individual improving? Are there still issues? To look at that. And then if there is no improvement over a period of time, which again may vary, then a variety of things could happen. There has to be a proposal made as to what the employee is notified as to what will happen, and and then a decision is made.
By who?
By if we're talking about a GS employee, so it would be the the supervisor who would make a decision typically, or it could go up to higher level. Again, it's going to depend on the level of what we're talking about. But typically, the supervisor would be working with the employee on this and making different decisions.
Do you know how many human resources employees at the VA were terminated last year or the year before?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have that detail, but I'd be happy to take that for the record.
Okay, yeah, we would definitely like to get that. In his interview, Secretary Shulkin claimed that he would fire any VA employee who had been complicit in any waste, fraud, or abuse. But I think that's a little bit easier said than done, given, you articulated a relatively complex process. Is there any way that this can be streamlined so that when we identify examples of poor performance or misconduct, that this can be dealt with very expeditiously?
Well, I know that we have had a team working with staffers here on the Hill to take a look at that. I know that a bill was introduced yesterday, and we're currently reviewing that right now.
In the same interview, the Secretary said that he would like to use whistleblowers to bring issues to the forefront. I take this to mean that the Secretary believes that whistleblower process either has been inadequate or needs somehow to be reformed. Do you have any idea how he intends to do this? Or is it going to be a revised process, or what hasn't been done up to this point that now is going to be done?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have any knowledge of that, but again, I'd be happy to take that for the record.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your testimony. My time has expired. I'm going to recognize the ranking member now, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank the witnesses for your attendance and for helping us. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for the wonderful care that many of our veterans receive at the VA and for all the good work that you do. And Mr. Dahl and Dr. Barnett, thank you very much for your oversight, because I think the work that you do makes sure that we meet our obligations that we owe to our veterans. So I don't see an adversarial relationship here. I see people trying to do good work, and I see the Office of the Inspector General as just trying to make sure that we keep our game at a level that it should be. Let me ask you, though, we've talked a little bit this morning about the hiring freeze in the VA and across the federal government. A lot of people don't realize that about 30% of the employees for the federal government that work in the federal government are veterans. And it's even higher at the VA. We have about 32.5% of the people who work at the VA are veterans. So I have 3 major VA hospitals in my district. One is in Brockton, one is in West Roxbury, one is in Jamaica Plain. I'm a frequent flyer to those hospitals, and I typically will just pull people aside and talk, whether they're orderlies or maintenance or nurses or docs or therapists. I'll often ask them, how they came to work at the VA. And I don't think I've met anybody yet who was not a veteran. So maybe that's just in my district, but I am enormously proud of the work that they do there. I know that we had problems down in Phoenix with the VA, very unfortunate. We even had problems in a couple of other cities as well. I think San Antonio was one. But I'm very happy to say that when the VA went back, and I know the Inspector General's office was involved in that, and we did a whole assessment, my 3 hospitals got very, very high marks, as did the Bedford facility, which has a state-of-the-art Alzheimer's facility there. So I know this committee, we often have criticisms, but I don't want it just to be about criticisms. I want to make sure you understand we appreciate the good work that's being done. I have amazing people who work at the VA all around this country, and I know more personally the ones in my district, and they are a blessing each and every day what they do for our veterans. And what concerns me is this hiring freeze. So we have critical positions that are about 9,000 positions are vacant right now at the VA. And these vacancies serve, quote, critical functions. And so I would like to ask Ms. Mitchell, can you tell me what the impact would be if we continue this hiring freeze that prevents us from filling those critical positions, especially with candidates who are veterans who normally would have a preference, but now are being shut out?
Thank you for that question. First of all, let me say that by virtue of the authority conferred by the presidential memorandum, then Acting Secretary Bob Snyder took fairly immediate action to exempt a number of positions from the hiring freeze as tied to public safety. And so those essentially included folks involved in providing direct patient care, as well as our cemetery workers who take care of burials for our veterans and their families. So that in itself was a large mitigating factor. And we continue to look as we move forward as to whether there are other positions that should be considered for exemption.
I've had veterans come to me, though, in radiology and other positions that are not exempted. So they've been stopped. I had a Navy veteran just last week trying to get onto the VA, and he's being prevented because of the freeze. So what about the positions that have not been exempted? There are a lot of them based on the material I was given. There are a lot of positions that are not exempt.
That's correct. And
so what will the impact be on those?
Well, it's too early right now to assess the impact because we're about 30 days in.
Okay.
But I think the most important thing I could tell you is that we continue to look at vacancies, and our leaders across the department continue to look at the impact in their various areas. And certainly, as appropriate, we'll be coming in and asking for relief.
Okay. Let me ask the same question to Mr. Dahl over at the VA Office of the Inspector General. I know in the past that Inspector Generals have been critical of this type of freeze back when President Reagan did it and back when President Carter. This is not a partisan issue. Democrats and Republicans have tried this approach in the past, and it's had disastrous effects. But I'd like to hear from you in terms of what you think this might lead to.
The hiring freeze is definitely going to have an impact on our immediate operations. We've been fortunate that Congress has been supportive recently to help us right-size. Historically, we're a small office of Inspector General, especially when compared to the size of the overall department, the budget of the overall department. But fortunately, we've got a full-year appropriation. We've been given additional money to beef up our staff. But we have about 100 open positions right now below our ceiling. We've made the determination about half of those meet the exemptions because they deal with public safety or national security. But that leaves half of our positions that we have not exempted. So that will impact our ability to provide the level of oversight that we should be providing.
Okay, that's fair enough, and I know I'm over my time, so I appreciate that. And is it fair to say that the longer this freeze goes on, the more difficult it becomes?
I would say so. I mean, obviously, the department will probably feel some impact too, but their operations are going to continue.
Okay.
And, you know, without the bodies we need to provide the level of oversight that we should be providing.
Well, thank you. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. I will note for the record, the VFW National Commander actually spoke with Secretary Shulkin about this hiring freeze effect on the VA, and he reported that the Secretary's response was that the agency was satisfied with the exemptions. And so I just wanted, I know you can't necessarily speak for him as we had asked earlier, but that's what we have from the VFW. Chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida. We've actually had her husband testify with the Joint Committee here last Congress, so we want to first welcome you to the committee. It's good to have another Floridian, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to our witnesses for being here today and for the critical role that you are doing for our country. In holding this hearing on VA's path to reform, we should not lose sight of, I think, the larger issue that far from progress on reform, veterans face substantial harm, I believe, from President Trump's hiring ban. Secretary or Assistant Secretary Mitchell, are you aware of the number of unfilled job openings at the VA?
Right now, we have approximately 48,000 vacancies. In the neighborhood of 36,000 of those have been exempted from the hiring freeze.
Do you know how many of those jobs openings are from the Veterans Benefits Administration?
I can take a moment to look that up very quickly, or I can take that for the record.
Please take it for the record. And also to Secretary Snyder has exempted over 90 occupations from President Trump's recently announced hiring ban. Do you know if Secretary Snyder exempted any occupations within the VBA, any of specific occupations?
No, there were no occupations exempted within the VBA.
For fiscal year 2017, the VA requested funding from VBA to hire an additional 300 claims processors. Would you agree that the VA cannot now hire these additional claim processors because of President Trump's hiring ban?
At this point, they are not exempt positions.
They are not exempt positions. Okay. Just a second. The VA recently noted that if, and I quote, has made dramatic progress in reducing the backlog, improving timeliness of decisions, and reducing the overall pending inventory of disability rating claims, while at the same time improving the quality of its decisions. Secretary Mitchell, how will President Trump's hiring ban impact the VA's progress on this front?
At this point in time, I know that VBA is monitoring that very closely, and we are only about a month into the hiring freeze, so it's a little early to give you a strong assessment on that.
So would you say you've seen no change at all in the timeliness of the decisions or the process at all within the last month?
That's not within my area of responsibility, so I would be happy to take that for the record for you.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to recognize myself. I want to begin with the Office of Inspector General and the report, the review of alleged human resources delays in the Atlanta Medical Center. I would ask unanimous consent for it to be added to the record, and without objection, so ordered. I have a great deal of issues specifically with this report that has come out, and I want to thank you for being here. But it outlines some serious failures in the Atlanta VA, and in particular, some things that came out of great concern personally was the failure to conduct drug tests on employees, and they also allowed over 200 employees who had not completed background checks to work directly with some of our veterans for several months, and in some cases even years. This is a huge VA medical center in Atlanta, servicing some well in excess of 100,000 veterans a year. And I'm just curious how many of these people who had no drug tests or background checks, how many veterans potentially, if you can use the word, were exposed to these type of individuals, and why were they not adequately checked?
Congressman, there was just a lack of appropriate oversight at the facility to ensure that the drug test program was being administered. The person that was responsible for the program left. The backup person did not take on the responsibilities as they should have, and this happened for a 6-month period. I can't tell you how many people should have been subjected to the drug testing during this 6-month period, but they certainly were coming into contact with the patients and other employees at the medical center.
And how long did that take? Did that last?
Well, there was a 6-month period where there was no drug
No
testing.
drug tests at all?
Right.
Is that normal?
No, sir.
How long typically?
Well, we'd like to think that every facility would be conducting whatever drug testing they should be. But we have known from other work that there are facilities that don't conduct the tests or conduct a low percentage of the tests that they should.
Ms. Mitchell, have measures been taken to ensure that this won't happen again?
Yes, sir, they have. So beginning in October of 2015, our local drug program coordinators began certifying monthly that employees selected for random drug testing were in fact tested. And in November of that year, our own office began reviewing that data for compliance, and we have continued to do that. Subsequently, we are also working with our IT side of the house, not the Office of Information Technology, but with our partner to ensure that we have an automated way of making sure that everyone who should be considered for random drug testing is in fact considered.
So are you saying that specific to the Atlanta VA or across the board?
Across.
So are there any other medical centers where this type of thing can be happening?
I don't have any personal knowledge of that.
Shouldn't you?
Well, if I were to say to you, could it be happening? I think it would be.
And my question is, are there measures to ensure that it is not and that it will not happen?
Those are the measures, sir, that I was just talking about.
And those are for all our VA medical centers?
Yes, they are.
So you can ensure that that is not going to happen again?
Exactly. That's why those measures were put into place.
And the same would apply to the drug testing?
That's correct.
All right, and the background checks?
Sir, I'm not personally involved in the background checks.
Who
but
is?
It is another office within the VA, but I'd be happy to take that for the record.
I would like that. Have there been any VA employees who've been fired for this? Or any management level who let this slip through?
Sir, I'm not aware of that, but I'd be happy to take that for the record.
I would like that for the record. It seems to me, would all of you not agree that this is inexcusable?
Sir?
All right, then why is there no consequences?
Sir, I don't have enough personal knowledge to comment on whether or not there have been consequences as I sit here today. But again, I'd be happy to take that for the record.
Okay. All right. Dr. Barnett, is there any other recommendations that are coming down the pipe that time frame-wise for corrections of these type of things that you're aware of? Just want to give you an opportunity to weigh in.
So, Mr. Rice, we have one outstanding recommendation that still exists from a national drug-free workplace audit that we conducted that was issued, I want to say, about a year and a half ago, closer to 2 years ago, where we did a random sample of facilities and then checked to see to what extent random drug testing was going on at that time. And there is one outstanding recommendation that still exists with that report, and that is specifically related to ensuring that folks in the occupations that are considered high risk or drug testing designated positions are in fact coded as such in VA's personnel system, which is the new HR Smart system, so that those folks are actually eligible to be selected for random drug testing. Because once you are an employee at VA and you are in a drug testing designated occupation, physicians, police officers, those sort of folks, you are eligible to be selected on a monthly basis for random drug testing. So random drug testing at the facilities should be occurring once a month. The folks at HRNA randomly select employees. They then communicate those names down to the facility level, and then in the HR department at a facility level, there's a drug testing coordinator, and it's that person's responsibility then to inform those employees and have them go to the lab to submit a urine sample.
Okay. All right, I thank you. My time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be back on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. This is my first hearing since I've come back after 10 years of being gone.
We're glad to have you back.
Thank you. And I want to thank the panelists for coming and testifying. Obviously, a very important topic, and I share some of the concerns I know have already been expressed about this hiring freeze and its impact on the agency. Obviously, we know that the VA has had some challenges, and those need to be addressed at various levels, and we want to make sure that's done, and input from the OIG periodically is certainly critical to that. But if you step back and look at the overall context for this conversation, the hiring freeze and the impact that it's going to have on the ability of the agency to function at a high level and to meet the needs of the populations that it serves is obviously at stake here. So you've got 2 or 3 impacts that I know others have already called attention to, but I want to reiterate. One is just the service to all the veterans out there who benefit from the VA and what it has to offer, and you impose this draconian hiring freeze when you have thousands and thousands of positions that are open, and that's going to aggravate a situation in which the agency can't deliver at the level that it should be able to deliver. Secondly, as has been pointed out, I know by a number of my colleagues, many of those who are currently employed by the VA, but certainly many who could be hired if the freeze was not in place, are veterans themselves and are bringing a very special set of experiences and perspectives and qualities to the job that I think are indispensable to the mission of the agency and the way that it functions. And thirdly, just to bring it back to the hearing today, obviously a hiring freeze and other kind of resource restrictions on the VA that are imprudent can have an impact on the ability of the IG and others to do the work that they need to do as well. So all around, it doesn't seem like the freeze is a good idea. What I wanted to ask you, Ms. Mitchell, if you could respond, I imagine that the VA does focus groups, surveys with the folks that are served by the agency, as well as being in regular contact, I'm sure, with various veteran services organizations. And that contributes to the perspective that you have on what the impact of a freeze can be. In other words, as you're doing these surveys, as you're getting this information, you may be identifying in that way that there are certain needs of the agency that need to be met, that are going unmet because positions are not being filled. Or alternatively, that there's certain strengths of the agency that we want to maintain that could be imperiled by not being able to keep positions filled going forward. So I was interested just to get your thoughts based on the kind of information feedback that you get from the populations that are served by the agency on exactly what some of the impacts of this freeze could be.
So I have not seen anything since the hiring freeze began indicating anything like that, but would be happy to take that for the record.
Are there surveys that have been done previously? In other words, it would be very interesting to know of some surveys or feedback you've received since the freeze has been put in place. But are there surveys that have identified needs that you think relate to the hiring freeze in terms of whether those needs can be adequately met going forward, given that a freeze is now in place?
I have not seen a survey myself indicating that. I know that different surveys are done, so I would certainly be happy to take that for the record.
Yeah, that would be interesting for us to get here in the committee, because I think that might give us some additional context and perspective on the potential impact that this freeze is going to have going forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sorry I had to be in some other meetings, and so I may ask something that's already been asked, but I'm especially interested in this Veterans Choice Program and how it's working out. My staff, Alan Johnson, tells me that there's $1 billion of unused funding in that pot. Are the veterans, are they not happy with that program for some reason, or how's it working? Who can tell me about that?
I'm afraid that's not within my area of responsibility, but I would be happy to take that for the record.
Well, all right. Anybody else?
Sir, I'm with the Inspector General's office. We
Right.
have done work in Choice. I believe we have a report coming out as soon as tomorrow on Choice. And
Oh.
we have other work in the pipeline.
Okay.
I'd be happy to speak with the folks in our organization if you're interested in a briefing on the results of our work.
Well, I am very interested in that, how it's working, and I understand there's some interest in trying to remove some of the requirements like the distance and so forth, and make it give it a little more flexibility. I'm also I didn't know about this the big drug losses or theft of these opioids, and it said the report I have, it says jump from 200. These losses or theft at federal hospitals jumped from 272 in 2009 to almost 3,000 in 2015. What is the story behind that? Or what are we doing about that?
Well, within the Office of Inspector General, we do have an active investigation program that looks at drug diversion by VHA employees within facilities for their own personal use, diversion for illegal sale. I'm not with the Office of Investigations, but I'm sure we could provide you more information on that if you're interested.
Yeah, well, yes, I would. All right. Since I'm struck out on my first two questions, I guess, let me ask you this, and this goes back several years ago, but I saw on 60 Minutes several years ago that there were some VA hospitals that had very low occupancy rates at that time, And I remember they mentioned one in Philadelphia that had only a 40% occupancy rate. Are there other VA hospitals that are not being utilized at this point? Any place that we know of?
I hate to be the one to say strike three, but unfortunately, that's also not within my area of responsibility, but I'd be happy to get back to you on that.
Okay. Well, I would be curious about that too. So, all right. Well, I think that's pretty much what I was interested in. I would like some additional information on all three of those topics if you can provide them for me. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, and I would like to thank each of our, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a brief bit of business here. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter to President Trump requesting him to reconsider the federal hiring freeze signed by, I think, 120 members of Congress. I also have a letter from J. David Cox Sr., Eugene Hudson Jr., and Augusta Thomas from the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO, regarding the hiring freeze and its impact on veterans. And then we have a study, Employment of Veterans in the Federal Executive Branch by the United States Office of Personnel Management. I'd like to have these entered into the record, if I may.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I yield back.
Again, I'd like to thank each of you witnesses for taking time to appear before the subcommittee today. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit questions for the records. Without objection, so ordered. If there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.